Have you ever broken a rule just to break the rule? You ever broken a rule just because? It was interesting as I was digging through my own life for stories like this. I was like, I think I have one or two that I'm not quite ready to share in a recorded context. No one was harmed, I promise, nothing, but I was like, I'm going to search for another one. another rule. So I found one. So one day in middle school in band, and the geography of the band room is important for this story, but I had a friend who played flute in the band, and she was like talking while the band director was talking or something, and so the band director like wrote her name up on the board, and it was like bad, and now his name's up on the board. And I had an interesting thing happen internally in me in that moment. On the one hand, I was maybe a little bit like, defensive of my friend or something like that. But I also had this strange idea go through my mind where I was like, I'm gonna erase that name off the board. I'm just gonna walk right up there and whoop, wipe it off. And the band room, everyone's sitting down in the band room except for the percussionists. We're standing up kind of free and cool at the back of the band room. You can imagine the weird psychology that lives in people who play percussion because you're already not cool kind of because you're in band in high school, but you're the cool people of the not cool people, which is it's a pretty interesting place to find yourself. And so we're standing up, and so there's a water fountain, in like the back right of the room. And so it's often, people would get up and walk around. You got to walk around the seated band, and then there's a space behind the conductor and the whiteboard, and you walk behind there to get to the water fountain. And so that traffic pattern was like a common thing. And so she writes the name up there and goes back to conducting something. And I remember it so vividly. I almost feel like I was on autopilot. Walking around, going around, and then I turn the corner, and I walk it. Here's the band director. Here's me on the whiteboard. And I tuck my shirt in I'm wearing a hoodie. I go like this. And as I walk by, I go, and just wipe it all off the board. And I mean, the band went, there was like an audible gasp in the room, right? And on the one hand, I was kind of doing that to like stick up for my friend or something, but I also was not really in the habit of doing that sort of thing. And there was a transgress to transgress thrill, frankly, that came from doing it. And, now, looking back, the band director, I think, could see some of that. And so she was actually very gracious with me and had like a sit down afterwards that was about using our powers for good and something. So, which I was, someone else could have responded. I mean, it's, very infrequent that someone has the gall to go up and erase what a teacher's written on the board. So I did that. And, I did it in part because I liked it. And I wonder if you have ever had an experience like that, where you're like, there's something weird going on here where the breaking of the rule is a thrilling thing, where I kind of like it for its own sake. And there may be some other extenuating circumstance, but like for sure, even if not in whole, a part of this is like, this rule breaking is doing something for me all on its own. And there's something in our nature that creates that in us, right? I didn't have to like want myself to be that way. I didn't have to grow that in me. It woke up. And I was like, wow, that's there. Fascinating. St. Augustine writes about this in a very famous passage in his probably most famous book, The Confessions, where he writes about recognizing in himself as a young lad the thrill of stealing from someone's field just for the thrill of stealing. And this is a well-known depiction of Augustine in his repentance over that, and he's sitting under a pear tree because, of course, the pears are the things that he stole. So down through Christian history, Augustine's theology, his theft of pears, has been something that everyone loves to talk about. This is what he says. Yet I had a desire to commit robbery and did so, compelled to it by neither hunger nor poverty, but through a contempt for well-doing and a strong impulse to iniquity. For I pilfered something, and here's the key point, which I already had in sufficient measure and of much better quality. I did not desire to enjoy what I stole, but only the theft and the sin itself. I stole not to desire the thing. I stole to enjoy the theft itself. Why do we want to do this? Like, why is this thing in here, in us? I mean, all of us in our own way, if we were just in our most humble, self-aware state, we all have something in us like this in our life where we meet some rule and some expectation. We go, there's some thrill and enjoyment in just transgressing that. Some of us like to really transgress it. Some of us like to just tiptoe over the edge, tiptoe back and forth. That's just me. I was like, tiptoe on back. Just crossing the line, just the thrill of being over and back, over and over again. If you grew up in a Christian home or a religious home, I bet that a lot of you can relate to that. Just the tiptoe back, over and over again. Because there's something about the rules that do that to us and that wake us up into that place. And so, when we look at these things, we might think, my rebellious instinct is like woken up by rules. And so maybe the solution here is to just not have any rules. Maybe if like the rules and the boundaries and the fencing itself, the do not enter sign, makes me go, well, now I really want to enter that. Maybe the rules aren't good for me. Maybe we should have none of them. If the rules make me want to rebel so badly, maybe the rules themselves are bad. And this is a question that people put to Paul as they were engaging with his teaching on the rules and the law in the book of Romans. But the Bible says that the rules are good. The rules are good. But the Bible also says that there's something going on in me that makes the rules not good for me. The rules are good, but they're not good for me. And something has to happen such that the rules can become good for me again, so I can relate to them in a way that wakes up good things in me and not bad things. We're in the middle of a sermon series in the book of Romans. We're going to be in Romans chapter 7 today. We're learning that there's more to life than following the rules. If you have a Bible, I'd love for you to open up to Romans 7, verses 7 through 12. We have Bibles over on the table. You can have one. You can keep it if you don't have a Bible. I'm also going to have the text up on the screen. We've walked through so much in Romans. I've loved it. I hope that you've loved it. I hope that you've learned a lot. Hope that God's using it to speak into your life and to grow you and change you. When we get to Romans 7, Paul is addressing some very fine point arguments about how the law works and functions, because this question is really so important. It gets to the question of, in order to be part of God's people, do we all have to follow the rules? And in early Christian communities, people were asking that question with relationship to a specific set of rules called the Torah, the Jewish law, the law of Moses. And some people said, well, you definitely do have to follow those rules because God told us to. And some people said, something totally new has happened in Jesus where the rules don't matter anymore at all. And so there's this big conversation here about who gets to be God's people based on the relationship to the rules. And Paul's saying something that both agrees with both groups and disagrees with both groups at the same time. And it's very difficult to understand what he's actually saying. And in Romans 7, 1-6, he says that while the rules are good and the rules are still things, that the Mosaic law are still things that express God's word and God's authority and God's wisdom, that something has happened in Jesus that moves us out from under the legal sphere of those rules and the compulsion and the punitive threat of those rules themselves. And now, for the rest of Romans 7, Paul begins to answer and preempt objections that people may have to that view specifically. And one of the objections that people have is like, well, if God has done something in Jesus to move me out from under the sphere of legal authority of that law, then was that law bad? Did God move us out from under it because it was bad? Or the law itself was sin? And of course, this is a really incredible objection, right? I mean, this would be like a killer to Paul's argument. Because the Bible affirms that the Mosaic law is God's words. Jesus affirms that God spoke through Moses. And so it doesn't compute that law could be bad or could be sin. And so Paul seems like he's stuck, he's in between a rock and a hard place when this objection comes to him. And yet we're going to see how he answers this particular objection in this passage. Again, we're in Romans 7, verses 7-12. I titled today's sermon, "The Rules Are Good and Good for You." I'll read the text aloud. What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive, and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me, for sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Let's look at what Paul's saying here. The first thing that he's saying is that, and I don't know, this is maybe my punchy way of articulating it, the rules aren't good for you. Could that be true? Could it be right? Am I at some place that's playing fast and loose with the scriptures? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. You judge for yourself. You open up the scripture. You read it. You interpret it. You see. Let's look at this. Paul says that there are at least two things in this passage that the rules do to me, or that are done to me through the rules, that without the rules they wouldn't happen, that are bad for me. Two things. Let's look at some of this text again. Let's look at Romans 7:7-8. It says, "Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, 'You shall not covet.' But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness." Here's one major thing that Paul is saying that happens to me once I encounter the rule. I get knowledge of sin. Knowledge of sin and wrongdoing that I didn't previously have. And as a result of that knowledge, now that I know what the bad thing is, I find myself wanting to do it all the time. Let's just be really clear. Paul's language here is very strong. Yet if it had not been for the law. That is very strong language about the way that, like, if the law didn't exist, I wouldn't have knowledge of what sin is, and the desire to do it, it would not be produced in me in the same way. That's crystal clear. A second thing, the law gives me knowledge of sin. The rules give me knowledge of sin. The second thing that the law and the rules do for me is in Romans 7:10-11. The text says this: "The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me, for sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me." This is the second time that we see the language of seizing an opportunity, right? And we get this thing, sin. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But what does sin do? It seizes an opportunity through the commandment. And that language through is incredibly important. The idea is that the commandment is the mechanism by which sin is able to get a hold of me through the knowledge of the law and then produce the desire to do that bad thing as a result, and also to get a hold of me such that I would now want to break rules, which brings punitive things to me. It brings punishments when I rule break, and those rule-breaking punishments ultimately lead to what? To death. That wouldn't happen. If sin wouldn't be able to seize that opportunity in the same way if the commandment weren't there. How is it able to seize it? It seizes that opportunity through the commandment. And so the rules, through a complex set of circumstances, and yes, some other key actors in the equation that I'm going to get to and name and tease out, does two things to me that are not good for me. One, it gives me knowledge of what not to do, and now I want to do it. That's what it does to me, and it's not good for me. And the second thing that it does is it creates this category of rule breaking that once I rule break, I have punitive things coming that ultimately lead to death. Paul is saying very clearly that these two things come to me as a result of my encounter with the rules. I do want to point out here that in Romans 7:10-11, the language here says, "For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me." There should be no surprise to those of us who have gone through our truth group that sin deceives and kills, because sin is a dark spiritual power that's related to a personified dark spiritual power that the Bible talks about, who we often call Satan. And Jesus describes Satan and who he is and what he does very simply and clearly in John chapter 8:44. And guess what Satan does in John 8:44? He lies and he kills. In John 8:44, Jesus says this, speaking to the Pharisees: "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. What is he? He is a liar and a murderer. And so sin deceives and sin kills because there's a spiritual kinship between these two powers. Again, the key language here is the language that helps us to see that there are things that are happening to me that are bad that would not be happening if I was not having an encounter with the rules. This language of if it had not been for the law, and the language, the commandment proved death to me. The commandment that was supposed to bring life proved death. I'm going to come back to the supposed to prove life part, but it just says now, the commandment proved death to me. Seizing an opportunity through the commandment, all these bad things that come as a result of my encounter with the rules, and some of you have had this experience. I think all of you, if we were honest, but we'll say some. Some of you have had the experience of the rules doing bad things to you. The rules waking up in you a desire to do something bad or harmful that wasn't previously there. The rules laying out for you a list of commands to follow, and then you don't get them right, and you break some rule, and now you receive some punishment. That the very things that came to you saying, if you do these things, good things are going to happen to you, they became a whole new opportunity to fail at the rule following, and then something bad happened to you. Have the rules ever incited you to break the rules, to do something that you really don't think you wouldn't have done otherwise unless someone had said, don't do that? When we break the rules, isn't it true that we often find ourselves hurt and hurting others? Sometimes we can find ourselves, maybe our whole societal time over multiple decades now has found itself particularly in a rebellious place, in a rule-breaking place, in a place where people feel deep needs to break free from religious past back there or traditional culture back there and transgress across a whole number of things. The only challenging thing is, why is it that in the ways that we find to transgress, we often find things that are harmful for us? I mean, isn't it true that often when I find some rebellious spirit or impulse in me, I find some expression of that rebellious spirit that actually isn't good for me? That over time I would look back and go, gosh, that was a destructive pattern of behavior. I needed to do it at that time because it's how I shook off the authority of my parents or of the town I grew up in or the whatever. But really going back, I kind of wish I'd never done that. I mean, the classic example of this is drug use. Right? The ways that, just classic, huge example. I mean, pop star, rock star, the stories are all the same. I rebelled in part by doing drugs. I wished I'd never touched a drug in my life. I mean, there's that narrative pulled out over time. We have that narrative pulled out in our own lives over and over again. Where we're that rebellious thing that served a purpose back there was something that actually harmed me and other people. And so there are consequences of, this relationship with the rules that makes me want to break them just to break them. Well, now I'm doing something that actually over time I might look at and go, that wasn't good for me. I understand why I did it back there. I maybe almost needed to do it back there to get free from that thing, but it wasn't good for me. Maybe you have experienced something like this in your own life. And as a result of these things, again, it's very easy for us to look and go, gosh, if I just hadn't had such a bad encounter with the rules in the first place, maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to do that thing, to transgress that boundary, to try that destructive thing. Maybe it's just the rules weren't good for me, and this is exactly the question that people are asking Paul. And so, this may lead many of us to think the rules are bad. In the language of Romans 7, the rules are sin. The law is sin. That's what people are thinking that Paul might be saying here. But Paul says, and this is the whole point of the passage, that is not true. That there is a distinction between my experience of the rules and the way that ends up being not good for me at times, and the goodness of the rules themselves and the law itself. The law is good. They're just not always good for you. But the fact that they aren't good for you doesn't say something bad about the laws in their nature and the rules in their nature. It says something about what's going on in me. In other words, the rules aren't good for you, challenging point 2, because you're not good for you. Now, that's a big statement. Not painting with a broad brush here, but there is something specifically true in Romans that Paul lays out very clearly about something that's going on in me that leads the rules to be not good for me over and over and over again. And that part of me is not good for me. And it turns a good thing into a bad experience of that good thing. Let's look in Romans 7:7 and 8-9 to see this worked out. Again, Paul says, what then shall we say, that the law is sin? By no means. He's like, nope, not at all. Absolutely not. Let nobody ever say it. No. For apart from the law, he says, sin lies dead. Once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. Paul's clear answer here is that no, the law is not bad, the law is not sin. The issue is that when I encounter the law and the rules, it wakes up something in me that then turns that experience of that good thing into something that is bad and has bad effects in my life. And this thing is sin. This is what this text says, that there's somehow this thing called sin. Gosh, what is sin? A proclivity to get something wrong. Sin is, oh man, I don't know. That's the one thing the classic metaphor here is I just missed the mark, right? It's an archery context. I missed the mark. Sin is that thing that goes, I could bring my best efforts 100% of the time to something and I would still find a way to get a couple points of it wrong. There's something in there about our nature that when it encounters the rules, it turns good things into a bad experience for me. Now, some of you, I know, would struggle with the idea of sort of the reality of sin in me. We're like, oh man, can we be done with that? Can I be done with the part where I come to church and people tell me that I have sin? I get it. I've heard it a million times. I've heard people yell it. I've heard people whisper it. I've heard people write it. Well, you haven't heard people write it. You've seen people write it. You've heard people talk it. I get it. And let me just, there's a million things to say about that. But let me just say today, it is just really, really, really difficult to account for the reality of the state of the world and society and human history without the hypothesis that something's not right in our nature. It's so difficult. I know that everyone wants to think today, right? And this is it's Rousseau and an Enlightenment thing. I get it. Humans are basically good, optimistic view of human nature. Just honestly, think of the things that trouble you about the world today. Think of the senseless deaths, the chronically unsolved conflicts, the amount of material wealth and things that we have and how unequally they're distributed around the world. Think of the things that trouble you. Do you really think that people who are basically good in their nature would have created that world? Do you really? Just honestly. It is just so difficult to account for the brokenness of the world if you do not have some piece in your worldview that says there's something not right in here. Even our best efforts, right? Come on. All the times we've tried to fix problems throughout human history, only to make them worse by the fixing, that is sin. That's what it is. It's even my best efforts get corrupted and go awry. A famous Christian public theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr, who lived and worked and thought in New York City, taught at Union Theological Seminary for a very long time, is a famous quote. It's attributed to him. I found it in a book, but I actually can't tell if he's quoting somebody else when he says it. So this may be slightly apocryphal, actually. But famous quote that everyone either wants to attribute to Reinhold Niebuhr or G.K. Chesterton goes like this. The doctrine of original sin is the only empirically verifiable doctrine of the Christian faith. Now, let me be clear. That's not to say that there are no empirical evidences of other doctrines of the Christian faith. That's not true, and I don't believe that. But empirically verifiable, right? To say that I can get raw data and prove a thing. Reinhold Niebuhr, maybe, said that the doctrine of original sin is the only doctrine where you can go, yeah, I basically have test tube proved that. I've proved it in a lab. The doctrine of original sin. This is the problem of sin in you and sin in me and sin in us, because the reality is that the rules, big picture, and listen, today I'm speaking about the rules generally in their best articulated form. We could quibble over is a specific rule or law good, right? I'm not up here stumping for every rule that's ever been articulated. I'm stumping for good rules that have been articulated, right? Generally, the good rules, that we would all sort of agree these are good rules, they would do two things for me that are super good and super positive. The first is that they would perform a boundary function of protecting me from harm. They would do that. And as they protect me from harm, they'd protect other people from harm. And that would just be a really valuable thing. I know that we all go through this youthful, sophomoric thing where we're I need to get hurt a little bit, stop fencing me in, blah, blah, blah. But really, big picture, the rules do a very good thing for us when they say, this is how you could not hurt yourself and other people. That's a super valuable thing. Really, really valuable. I really hope, just as God's grace to you, that if you haven't been hurt bad enough by some transgression to maybe still be in the place where I maybe think that, you know what I'm trying to say. Rule breaking is something that's just, I don't know, kind of a fun part of my life, whatever. I pray right now for wisdom for you, that you would go, you know what, I don't need to learn that lesson the hard way. Because some of us have learned that lesson the hard way, and it really sucks. And it's something that those of us who have learned that lesson the hard way, gosh, I wish that I just could have listened to other people's wisdom. I wish I had the grace to do that. And some of you, I don't know, you're wondering, would God give you now the grace to go, you don't need to be really devastatingly hurt to learn this lesson. Just learn it now. The second thing that the rules would do is that they would guide you into a good way. The rules have a negative function, not negative bad, but a leaning away, and a positive function, a leaning towards. They protect you from harm, and they also help to lead you into a good way, a good life. That's part of what the rules are doing. They have a directing purpose. Rules become to us these rigid, bitter things when they're just prohibitions without an attachment to a sense of where this is taking me and why it's a good thing. But that, of course, is what rules are supposed to do. They're supposed to go, here's the good life that would be present for you if you would listen to the wisdom of these rules. And some of us feel lost. I mean, not engaging with the rules over a long period of time doesn't just to a feeling of oh, I'm bad or something. It leads to a feeling of, I don't know where I am. And I don't know where I'm going anymore. Right? Directions on a map are rules. What are they doing? They're not trying to get you to make the right turn correct. They're trying to get you to a place. And some of us have been shoving the rules away for so long, we're I don't know where I am anymore. And I don't know where I'm going. And that's not about harm. That's about the pain of not knowing who you are and not knowing where your life is headed or why it's meaningful or valuable. And looking at your life decade after decade going, I didn't end up in the place that I wanted to. I removed myself from the directions that would help me get there. It would actually be great if we could engage with the rules in this way, right? That would be the rules are good and good for me. But something has to change in what's going on in here in my nature, because right now the rules are good and mostly not good for me. And this change is exactly what God has accomplished through the death and resurrection of his son, Jesus Christ. He's died to end the decisive power of sin in your nature so that your nature can be free again to interact with the rules and go, I'm not just run by this bad initial sin. The rule is not just triggering for me into this bad set of responses about sin in relationship to it. But something has changed in the way, in the place that sin takes up in my nature such that I can have a different response to the rule itself. Jesus died to kill sin in you so that the rules can be good for you again. Romans 7:10 hints at this when it talks about the life-giving promise, the life-giving intention of the rule and the commandment itself. It says this, the very commandment that promised life. Now we know in the context of this immediate argument, Paul's going to go on and say, prove to be death to me. But the whole point in this moment is that the commandment promised life. We saw this in the last couple of weeks, that the Old Testament law says those who do these commandments will live by them. It doesn't just mean avoid punishment, it means live, flourish, be alive and like it. We'll live by them. And the commandment promises you this kind of a life, but I can't engage with them in this way when sin is ruling in me and over me. But if there were a way that that rule of sin in me could be ended, if its strong back could be cracked and broken, I could now have something going on in here that relates to the rules in the way that they would be good for me again. And this is what God has done in the death of Jesus Christ, that when you and I participate in his death, something in our nature has changed because God's Son took on all of the things that are essential to human nature. All of those basic things, those ontological things, those experiential things, those epistemological things, those things that we are and do and feel and know, so that he could accomplish a nature change in you and me. And he could remake what it means to be a human if we would find ourselves in him, so that we can now interact with the world, the words and the wisdom and the rules and expectations of God in a way that is good for me. Romans 6:6 says, we know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. That way that sin, body, probably flesh here in Romans 6:6, lives in some way in my fleshly nature, that might be killed and ended, so that I would no longer be enslaved to sin. This, of course, doesn't mean that we don't still feel the tug of sin, the power of sin, the temptation of sin. It isn't to say that we're just, going to live some sinless life. People have interpreted Christianity that way in the past. I think that it's wrong. We are progressively becoming more sinless, more sanctified, more righteous, more all of these things, but it doesn't mean this isn't a struggle. It's not a challenge. It does mean that something in spiritual reality has changed in power, such that sin's power in me and over me is no longer the same. That if I want it to be done, then the rule of sin in and over my nature is done through the mighty work that Jesus Christ has wrought on the cross. And that is a spiritual reality and a spiritual claim that you have to decide if you want to test out in relationship with God or not. That Jesus really did make accessible to me the power such that the rule of sin would be over in my life. And now I can relate to the rules in a way that is life-giving and good for me. This is what the Bible claims, that the rules that are good for you again, and so that you should choose to live by them and live. Romans 7:12 says, so the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Paul's argument here is so tight. Paul's so much of Romans can be like, oh, follow this passage, and then this, subordinate clause, and this, that, and the other. And it's like, wow, Paul, this is a lot to follow. A lot of prepositional phrases here, Paul. Give me just a good old subject, verb, object. How many see what's going on? And here in Romans 7, if we just link verse 7 and verse 12, we just see really clearly a nice, neat passage about the flow of Paul's argument here, right? Because in verse 7, he says, what then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Fast forward to verse 12. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. All that middle stuff, what's it doing? It's just proving his point that the law is not sin. It is holy and righteous and good. Super simple. All that middle stuff there is helping us get from the question in verse 7 to the statements and the conclusion that the commandments is holy and righteous and good in verse 12. And this is because of Jesus, that we can relate to, the law just is these things, but that the law, the rules can be for me holy and righteous and good. And let's just zoom in on those three things in particular, and let me try to convince you about why you want to be able to relate to the rules in that way. That the law is holy and righteous and good, but it would be good if it could be those things for you, because you should want to be holy and righteous and good. To be holy is to be set apart. You're like, oh, okay, I kind of don't care about that. It's got like a religious context, a purity context in Leviticus. There are good things to say about that. Without deep diving the whole thing, let me just use a different word that you are going to like, and that's unique. You do want to be unique. Oh, wow, yes. Listen, there's a shadow side to everything. Maybe for some of you, your desire to be unique is not the most helpful thing. But let's be clear, you are unique. God has done something in creation that will never be done again in you. And my goodness, that is a wonderful and glorious thing. You are unique. And the reality is that following the rules in the right way is the way that something becomes unique. When you live in a way in relation to the rules that just says, get off me, you're living in a way that will never bring you to uniqueness. Because it takes a specific way of saying yes to some things and no to other things to become unique. I mean, just think about whatever form of excellence you enjoy, athletic excellence, musical excellence. No one stumbles in to that kind of excellence, to that kind of uniqueness. There are rules to be followed that enable the uniqueness that is already present in that person to be revealed in what it could be. And things like practice and discipline and knowing how the rules of the scale work and knowing this, that, and the other, knowing the rules of the game, knowing them inside and out, being able to live them. There is no other way to that kind of uniqueness without taking on the rules. You are unique. But if you're living in a way in relationship to the rules and to God's rules that just says, get off me, you are actually living in a way that betrays the uniqueness that is in you and that will never, ever put you on a path to allow that thing to be revealed. You are unique. And in a surprising way, that should make you want to come back to the rules of God and say, God, I do want these things to be good for me again. Because you should believe in the unique thing that God's doing in you, right? Like, no, not just like on your own. Oh, I'm unique and I'm great. But through the love and the grace of the Creator, you should go, my uniqueness does matter because God says it does. And so I'm going to live in a way that corresponds to that. The second thing is you should want to be righteous. And again, there's a million things we could say about this, but let me just suggest to you that everyone here wants to have lived rightly. People in this time do want to live rightly. Like, we disagree on exactly what that means or whatever, but like, people in this time do care about verdicts. Verdicts being pronounced after we're gone and being found having lived rightly, right? Now, in a secular context, we don't think about that judgment context in terms of God. We've replaced it with something else. History, right? I mean, not to quote Hamilton off the cuff here, but history has its eyes on you, right? And what is that saying? That's saying, I want to live rightly. That's what that's getting at. We want to live rightly today. Well, I have news for you. There is no way to live rightly unless you live in a life-giving relationship with the things that tell me how to live rightly. That's what the rules are. And so it would be amazing for you if you had, through a nature change that is on offer to you through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, had something in you that enabled you to live in relationship to the rules, and you said, I like these things, they're good for me, and they're going to make me live rightly, and now the verdict will be pronounced, that I will have been found to be righteous. Of course, that's biblical language that all the faithful get into their heart down throughout time. We all want to be found righteous by God. Everything else, that when God looks at the age and the time that I live in, when he looks at the overflow and the products and just whatever's left of the jumbled mess that was my life, that God somehow will look at that and say, this person was righteous in their time. I know you want that. You want to live rightly and to be found to have lived a right life. That comes by being able to live in a right and good relationship with the rules. And finally, you want to be good, and we want to live lives that are good. Goodness blesses me, but for today, let's just get clear about how goodness blesses other people. How when my life is good and overflows with goodness, I walk into every situation, and whoever's in that situation, their life gets better. We need to do a little bit more work today, being done, thinking about me and myself and the life I want to live and the things that I want to get, and begin to think like, whose life am I constantly stepping into? And am I bringing good stuff into it? like the field of the lives of other people, when I run through it, I just torn a bunch of stuff down and kicked over their planters and, I've planted a bunch of stuff that they're not trying to grow in there and, or like, are people like, you know what, like the field of my life got better because you walked through it. That's what goodness would do in the lives of those around you. And not to press too hard on you and your life and your relationships, but isn't it true that we do a lot of random and wild running through the fields of other people's lives? Like, I don't know, I just tore about in there for a while. What if we were done doing that? And what if we were done viewing other people that way? What if we said, I do have wants and desires for my own life, but I want to be the person that when I step into a room, I'm injecting good stuff into everyone else's life over and over and over again. I know on your most peaceful days, when the fog of your life has lifted and all the fears and anxieties and disappointments have lifted, I know that when you're seeing clearly, you want to be that kind of person. And you want people to say that about you. You want people to say, my life got better because you were in it. How is that going to happen unless we come back into a good relationship with the rules and the wisdom and the authority of God such that I become good in relationship to good rules and I begin to inject good things into the lives of other people? I hope I've persuaded you that you do want to become holy and righteous and good. And if you want those things, you should choose them today. And you should choose them by believing in God's Son, Jesus Christ, and believing that there's actual power at the cross and power in the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit to dethrone sin in my nature, such that I have power to interact with it in a new way. And the rules won't just be good things over there, they'll be good things for me right here. God bless you. Amen.